This is a view catcher. It's one of my favorite tools for plein air painting. And one of my most frequently asked questions is, how do you use it? I've made a few short videos about it in the past, but in this longer video, I'm going to tell you what it is, how to use it, and at the end, I'll offer a few other options. This video is not sponsored. I'm just an artist and an art professor sharing one of my favorite tools with you to help you on your own artistic endeavors. This view catcher has been around for a number of years now, and it's essentially a fancy viewfinder. And a viewfinder is something that, if you're drawing in the three-dimensional world, will help you isolate the three-dimensional scene onto a two-dimensional surface. It's similar to the viewfinder that you have in your camera. And here's how it works. It arrives in this packaging. I always like to keep an extra one handy for when I make little art kits for family and friends. Inside is this leaflet that recommends different ways to use it. But if you're a visual learner, this video is for you. It has this panel in the center that you can slide in or out to adjust it to the size of your drawing or painting surface. I love painting in a square format, so for that I can just pull it all the way down and it's really easy. But if I wanted to use a more standard size that drawings or painting surfaces are often sold in, there are these helpful little lines that show you how far to pull out the panel for the exact same dimensions. On the front, there's an 8 by 12, a 9 by 12, and an 11 by 14. And on the back, there's an 8 by 10 and a 12 by 16. These are standard sizes, but you can divide those numbers in half or double them to find sizes that are smaller or larger. So for instance, an 8 by 12 is the same ratio as a 2 by 3, a 4 by 6, a 16 by 24, a 32 by 48, and so on. If you're not mathematically inclined, I'll list a little cheat sheet in the description to help you. These little markings are invaluable because it means that the scene you isolate to draw or paint is always going to be the right size for your drawing or painting surface, and you can avoid having to do things like squish elements in to make them fit, and in the process making them look all wrong, or simultaneously leaving too much space on the outside. It's basically going to help you fill the space in the most compelling way. If the surface I'm working on isn't a standard size that fits into one of these categories, I will just line up the view catcher above the frame of that surface until I get the right dimensions, and then I'll use it that way. The main thing a viewfinder or a view catcher will help you do is to create dynamic compositions or scenes. A strong composition is one of the most important components in any good art. It considers all of the elements of art and the principles of design and arranges them all together to create the most pleasing scene. And it's helpful to understand the elements of art and the principles of design, which are the language of art, if you want to make pleasing art. But even if you don't know them, a view catcher is going to help you find the best scene because you are a human and you know what looks good and what doesn't. Hopefully. You'll ideally want to choose a scene that will fill the frame in an aesthetically pleasing way that's going to lead the viewer's eyes around the picture without getting stuck in any one areas or leading the eye completely off the page altogether. If I'm standing before a beautiful landscape, it can be really challenging to find the perfect scene to paint. There are so many choices. I can look through the view catcher to find something interesting. And sometimes the scene that you think is going to look good isn't as interesting once you put a frame around it. And sometimes the things that you might overlook actually present to be a really interesting little composition. You can also use the view catcher to draw a few different frames for thumbnail sketches in your sketchbook to help you determine which scene is going to be best. You can then do a few quick value sketches to help you determine which composition is going to be the best and the most exciting. This will help you decide on the perfect composition before you spend hours drawing or painting. Another feature of the view catcher is that it's a neutral gray color. This is intentional because it matches the middle gray of a grayscale. It's standard practice in art to create value scales and also color scales that have up to 10 different values from your lightest lights to your darkest darks. And as a side note, as an artist, it's really beneficial to make your own value scales and color scales to help you learn how to do that. So you can use the gray of the view catcher to make sure that you have a balance of values that are lighter and darker than this middle gray color. But if the gray frame isn't enough and you're having trouble with that, it also conveniently has these two holes, one in the center and one in the corner. And these help you isolate colors in a scene to determine if they're a darker or a lighter value than this middle one. All colors have value, and many new artists make the mistake of using colors that are too similar in value and don't have enough of a range in their work. This can be a bit trickier if you're a newer artist. If you're still having trouble, try squinting your eyes, because your eyelashes will work much the way that a shutter does in a camera to block out light, and it's going to better help you see the darkest darks and the lightest lights in a scene. So if I'm looking through the view catcher, I can close one eye and look through the hole to see if a color is lighter or darker than the gray. You can see here that this section is lighter and this one is darker. And this one is about the same. And I can't tell you what a useful tool that is, especially for beginning artists. To best use the view catcher, it really helps to close one eye and then look through the viewfinder with your other eye and just move it around the landscape until you find different scenes that look interesting. And you can even turn it in different directions. So maybe you want to do a painting that is a landscape format, or maybe you actually find something that's more interesting in the portrait format. It can be a little challenging once you find the perfect scene to be able to transfer that successfully onto your piece of paper. So sometimes what I'll do to help with that is to actually take the view catcher and clip it to my sketchbook, or if I'm painting, clip it next to the panel that I'm painting on. And that way it's not going to move, and I can just go from the left to the right or the right to the left, depending on where I've clipped it. And my eye can move freely between the two without me having to worry about fiddling to draw and then pick this up and find it in the right direction again. Another thing that I'll do sometimes is find the perfect composition and then take a photograph of it and crop that photograph exactly to the same dimensions that my painting is going to be. And I don't recommend drawing from that photograph because that defeats the purpose of drawing from life. But it is really useful later on to go back and see the scene exactly as it looked when it first captured your heart. There are other viewfinders available to buy that you might like. These two both have lines drawn on them to help you with transferring the scene, but I find these to be limiting, and they also assume that you're going to use a specific size of paper. You can make your own viewfinders by taking some scrap cardboard and cutting out a few different sizes that are the same shape as your paper or canvas. The advantage of these is that you can make them as small or as large as you'd like. I also like to use old slides because they're lightweight and I can just put them in my pocket. I've wrapped a piece of watercolor paper around this one and taped it so that I can just slide it to make different sized frames if I need. Though I do find these to be maybe a little bit too small to be as effective as the view catcher or something a little bit larger. Another tip I usually have students do when they're first learning to draw or paint outside is to take a clear sheet of acetate and tape it to the back of the mat board that you would use for a picture frame. Then draw a line to divide it in half horizontally and another one to divide it in half vertically. You can then hold this up to the scene you want to draw or paint and use a water-based marker to draw the main lines and shapes. This is especially helpful if you're drawing a scene with architecture. And again, if you want to keep it from shifting, take something like a tripod stand and just clip your frame to that tripod stand so that it's not going to shift as you're doing those quick lines. You can then take that clear frame and just set it on a sheet of white paper or something so that you can more easily see the lines, and then draw what you see on your paper or canvas. Simplifying your drawing or painting into a few lines or shapes like this can make it a lot easier. And it's also going to make sure that you have a balanced composition with enough lights and darks and enough variation in shapes and lines. A fun fact is that Leonardo da Vinci used a similar device when he was learning how to do linear perspective. I prefer this method to using a grid because it helps you practice seeing the whole scene rather than just relying on one little square at a time, which can often make you miss the woods for the trees. And when you're finished, you can wipe away the lines with a damp cloth and reuse it as many times as you'd like. This is a larger one, but you can make these in any size you'd like as well. Even still, if I'm not in the right mind frame for painting, or if I just want to make my life a little bit easier, I'll take the view catcher and just clip it next to the surface that I'm going to draw or paint on. If you don't want to clip it and you're just holding it and drawing and you want to be sure that you can find the exact same scene, it's helpful to take one corner and find a visual marker that you can always line that same corner up with so that you can easily find the scene as you're shifting between the looking and the drawing. And once you have the main lines and shapes down on your painting, you don't need this anymore. You can just carry on with drawing and painting the scene in front of you. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this has been helpful. If you'd like to see more drawing and painting tips, I do have playlists here. Or you can check out my Patreon where I have other drawing and painting and narrated painting videos available every month. I hope you all have a beautiful day with many happy painting adventures of your own.